So welcome to this session about odors. So now it's time to start. So the first speaker is well known. It's Anton van Harreveld, who founded OdourNet consultant agency 40 years ago, and of course he's the convener of working group at the SEN level. So two working group, one on olfactometry and another one on instrumental odor monitoring system. So please, John.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed lunch. It's an important event here in Bilbao. And also I hope that this will be the last time that you will hear me speak on an update on the EN13725 standard, because it's close to completion, and I think it will be the last time I do this. Standardization is a very slow process. It is a way to introduce guidelines and to reduce unwanted variation. So if every country does its own thing, then we have data and results we cannot compare. So that's what you want to do. You want to take out unwanted variation and you want to keep flexibility. The timeline is long. Work on olfactometry started in 1991 with the creation of a European group. And the first time we needed 12 years to get to a standard on olfactometry, which was published in 2003. There is a process to renew and revise these standards. Every 4 years there is a vote. So in 2012 there was a vote to indeed revise this standard, and we are now close to completion, and the translation is underway and the production of the standard. So we need a formal vote to approve the standard in the Technical Committee 264, which deals with air quality. So it's an environmental standard. But we expect that to be favorable. Who are doing this work? Well, volunteers who are nominated by SEN members. Those are the national standardization organizations. They do that on a volunteer basis, on personal title. They don't represent their country or an entity. They represent their own knowledge. And national mirror groups can be instated to maintain contact with the professional community in those countries. It's normally organized by a secretariat, and a convener is charged with guiding the process to completion, if at all possible. We made a number of task groups. Of course, in a revision, you get a list of things that people want done and reviewed and improved. So we had these task groups on sample storage, on reference materials for panel selection. We felt that N-butanol was not on itself enough. Sampling of passive area sources, sampling of active area sources, dynamic dilution during sampling, new standards that were there for sampling approaches, the calculation of uncertainty, and the compatibility of yes-no enforced choice methods that was a concern, and health and safety issues. So each of these themes were treated by a task group of people who went more intensively and more frequently into that subject and came back to the general working group. The drafting process is now completed, and the final working draft has been submitted in March of this year. There was an inquiry, so a draft document was already published in 2019. And the feedback on that, of that inquiry was received and needs to be processed. We had an Excel table of 132 pages, I believe, of questions, and you need to document what you do as a working group with those comments. That has been done, and now the final editing by a group of professionals at SEN is happening. So we hope that the vote will take place very soon. I've included the table, which is in an annex in the standard, that lists all the changes compared to the previous version. I will not go through that in the full detail because time does not allow that. I will pick out a few things. In the scope, we have changed a few things to make them clearer. Worth mentioning is that field olfactometry is excluded from the scope. So if you read this field olfactometer is compliant with EN13725, that's false, that's not possible. That is specifically excluded. Another thing is that we have not been able to find a way, as one of the previous speakers from Italy mentioned, a way to sample static surfaces. There were too many uncertainties, and in a document like this we can't have things that are still being debated. So we decided to exclude that from the scope. The same is for volume sources and more complex situations. Other issues that were changed was in the principle of the method. As I mentioned, there was critique that everything was related, including the uncertainty assessment, to one reference odor. In itself, the introduction of that reference odor allowed making the odor unit traceable to the unit of mass, so that was a very meaningful addition in the original standard. But we felt that a bigger range of reference materials should be available, so the new standard contains a method to determine the SROM value, the secondary reference odor mass, by comparison. So you get a comparative value of the concentration at the detection limit of another compound than butanol through direct comparison. In apparatus and materials, we found that stainless steel was not in itself a good material. It needed treatment, immobilization or coating, because there was a further research that saw low recoveries and reaction of sulfur compounds with stainless steel. So that has been adapted, and we specified minimum recovery criterion for equipment and sampling equipment. The other major issue that was addressed is the assessment of uncertainty. The criticism was that uncertainty was determined on butanol only, so on one reference material, and that did not take into account uncertainties caused by changes in panel composition and also in the use of real samples. So there was quite an in-depth effort to change that approach. And the approach that is introduced uses duplicate measurements with different panel compositions on real odor samples, practical odor samples, and a statistical method associated with that. So that is a very meaningful and better way to assess uncertainty of the method. With that uncertainty, the requirements for maximum uncertainty will still have to be maintained. So the standard and the requirements on performance have become more strict rather than more lenient. Also, we have looked at health and safety aspects. Of course, olfactometry is a human exposure experiment. You expose people to gas mixtures with chemicals. So you need to have a view on the safety of that exercise, and you need to inform people in the proper way of what you're supposed to do. And that includes the staff working in the olfactometry laboratory, but also the sampling staff who are exposed to the conditions where these materials are released. And specifically, if you sample process gases, so gases that are not released to the environment, you can have meaningful risks. So there is Not a completely closed method, but very good indications on how to approach that. I think those are the most meaningful changes in the standard. As I said, in the paper you can find the full table which lists all the changes, and if you happen to run an olfactometry laboratory, as some of you may do, that is a very good way to prepare yourself. And also the inquiry version is still on sale, so if you want a preview you can prepare in that way, because of course once this standard is published, also the accreditation people will pick it up, and it will need action in your laboratories to adapt to this new standard. The current status is, as I said, it's submitted, a vote is needed, and then it will have to be published somewhere in 2022. Once it's published, I will happily step down as a convener. I've done this far too long, and I think this is the last time. So if you are looking for a nice volunteer job, please put yourself on the list to take over this role. It is a great way to learn stuff from very good people who join in the work of these working groups. And I would like to thank all my colleagues who I've known during these years for participating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ton. So we have time for questions. No, of course, I don't have questions because I was in the group. I just want to say that typically the process is well working, because I just validate the translation in French, so few days ago. So I think it's the same for other languages.
Okay, thank you.
See, Yael, please.
It's more a comment, maybe a question, and please forgive me for saying this, but it's sort of disappointing that you excluded the issue of surface and volumetric sampling, because the uncertainties of this kind of sampling is so high. So if we do not account for this uncertainty, what is the meaning of having known uncertainty of the measurement in lab?
It was not excluded because we thought it was unimportant. On the contrary, and we put the findings in an annex as a basis for further work. But standards are an ongoing process, so I'm sure this will come back in the next revision. And we simply didn't have a method that was ready to reach consensus over and to assess the uncertainties. So sometimes you have to give in to the restrictions of reality, but it was done reluctantly, I can assure you.
Okay, no more question. Okay, thank you, Ton.
Thank you.